could do that. Let's just, for some reason, get all the stories again. And I don't know, let's just log it again, stories. So how this will work is, it'll first call the first GET request. After the first GET request is completed, the GET request, or the GET method will call your first success callback function, which is this thing on the outside. It will set y equal to stories, it will log y, and then it will make your second API request. Now when this API request is completed, it will then call its own success callback function to print the stories again. You'll probably have to deal with nested callbacks at some point when you build your web applications, so I'm just going to expose it to you here so you don't get surprised. Any questions? Okay, cool. Whew. Now that that's done, we're actually going to move on to our second exercise. So we're actually going to start filling out feed.js. Now, the goal of feed.js, ultimately, again, is to fill in methods that will make API requests to fetch our stories, to fetch our comments, and to create HTML elements for our stories and for our comments, and then finally, to append those HTML elements to the stories div in index.html. And to break this down a little bit more, we have three main functions, three main methods inside feed.js. The first is render stories. This is kind of the main function inside feed.js. It is in this method where you will make your actual API calls and you will pass their responses to the helper functions. Story.object is one of your helper functions. It will basically, given a story object, create an HTML element for that story. Comment.object is like story.object except for comments. So it'll, so given a comments object, it'll create an HTML element for that comment. Cool. So I split this exercise up into two parts because it's kind of big. In the first part, you'll work on making requests to get all the stories only. So inside of render stories, you will make your request to the /API/ stories endpoint to fetch all of the stories. Then you will fill in story.object to create an HTML element for your stories. And then finally, for each of the stories that you retrieved, you will just append the element from story.object to the stories div inside of index.html. We've actually provided a structure for the HTML element for your stories for you, that's down here, and we can walk through it. So the first thing you might notice, let me just go back to standing up. The first thing you might notice is the outside div has this thing called, or has the attribute, has the ID attribute, and the value of the ID attribute will be equal to the story of your ID. The ID of your story. Oops. What this allows you to do is it allows you to track specific stories, right? We're going to be appending many, many, many stories to our stories div. And later on, if we want to go back and say, edit them, or to find a specific one, having a unique ID for them, based on their ID in our database, will make that easy to do. The second block right here is pretty straightforward. It's just going to be the div that contains the information of your story. And the third div here is what we're going to use for later. It's basically going to be a comments box. And that's where we will, in part 2, put all of our comments for that specific story. It also has a unique ID. It's, again, the story ID, and then just dash comments. So it's the alphanumeric string and then dash comments. Don't get confused by my syntax here. I wasn't really sure how to write it. And again, this unique ID will allow you to, in part 2, find this div for you guys to put your comments in. Does that make sense? So let's just go ahead and get started on this. I will give you guys like, I don't know, like 10 minutes to get started. And afterwards, I'll go over the code with you. Oh yeah, one other thing. In feed.js, at the top of feed.js, I provided to you a constant variable, which is the start of the endpoint that you will use, so please use that variable. I've also put in 2 comments that are the endpoints, and I've also put in a comment above story.object and above comment.object that gives an example of each of those objects. Yeah, cool. So let's just get started on this. Oh yeah, and staff walk around, help people if they need it. It's just us two. Dude, Money's here.
What?
Raise your hand.
Yeah, raise your hand if you need help. Yeah, you're going to make an API request to get all the stories. You're going to make an HTML element for each of the stories. And then you're going to actually prepend the HTML elements to your stories div. We prepend because we want our newer stories to appear on top. And if you forget how to create HTML elements, you can take a look inside profile.js.
Does anyone need help? Raise your hand. My boy Ashish will help you.
No, my voice is loud.
Go.
If anyone is lost, just raise your hand. We can be happy to help unconfuse you. Alright, gotcha. You good?
And you should be writing most of your code inside of a callback function for one of the API methods.
It's totally okay if you guys are lost. This stuff is pretty
Do you
complicated.
understand where you want to
Alright,
take this from?
alright.
Like, you look at the comments on top, you see like this, and then you can like, just finish this whole code. Does it go around?
You also don't have to worry about any of the styling. All of that is provided for you inside of style.css and Bootstrap.
When you wish you well, you can get it. In this case, you need to get for it, and you're letting us do it. And they give me two yeah. Yeah, because it says yeah. And this function will figure out how to take this data, make it HTML element.
I just want to know if I'm on the right track here. So my plan is in the story, do a get request, then the callback function is story object, create an HTML log using the stories that I'm sure. It'll return the HTML log. And I guess this is where I think this is not going to work, because I guess my idea was then to prepend it
What do you want?
to the HTML. The problem is I don't know if that's going to finish.
So it is an array, right?
So
So you can just
the
access
get
it as an array.
method from API.js, if you remember, does not return anything. So you can't actually set,
So you pass it into this
you can
function
actually
called
set
story
it to
DOM
be equal
object.
to
And like,
this because
it's up to you to fill them out, right?
the
Like
story
it
DOM
kind of
object
says
is
you
meant
what you're supposed to do here.
make an HTML
So
element
passing
for one
JSON
story.
object into this
For one
function,
story object.
you should take it,
So instead,
make
you're
an
going to
HTML
want to
element out
write a
of it, just
callback
like in
function
yesterday's lecture.
That creates
here
a
Put it on
that
the screen.
iterates through
So
the
remember
array
the yesterday's lecture
that you
when
pass,
we
and
were
then
taking JavaScript
calls
object
the
and
story
making
DOM object
HTML
for
elements?
each of the story JSON.
Like,
Okay.
something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then when do I add it to the actual HTML?
In here. So this will return an HTML element. So you're gonna make all of that inside of
Like for
story
the
DOM object.
Yeah,
You're
what
going
do
to
you want?
return that log, and then inside of underscores, you're gonna take those logs and you're going to add it to
not sure if this does,
the
but
corresponding place next to HTML.
do you understand how to do DOM manipulations like that? Yeah, I mean, look, it says create of
So-
it creates an element.
This function
And then he sets a
will
class,
call
and
a
then he
callback
sets the
function.
content of it.
Go
So
through
this
all the
part is
stories.
like how you create the DOM.
Which part is this going to be for loop? Stories. Yeah.
Or append child,
Oh,
appends it
okay,
to
and
some
then
class.
after, inside that callback function,
So you like get the div where you want to append it to.
after
and then you
calling
append
story
child.
DOM object, then you prepend it?
So like,
Okay.
you created
Okay.
HTML elements, right? Let's say you created HTML elements out of it. And now you need to put it on the page. Where do you put it? Inside of some specific div, right? So you find a div and you call append child function on it, and you pass in the new HTML element.
How do we create
You get data from the server. So that's step one. Step one is fetch this data. Step two is use this data and put it on the page.
What's the difference between creating a DOM object?
So, creating DOM objects is just like taking data and making HTML element out of it. It's not on the page yet, it's just somewhere. It's not visible. Rendering is actually putting it in the right place. That's the, do you understand the difference?
Which part?
I told you, right? Like, it's like append child is one that puts it on the page.
Did you try to create a
Yeah, like, and that's where you like create element A here. Alright, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so like your goal is to like fill out this function and then fill out this function. So you're fetching stories, right? So you're passing it to a story DOM object. And this function should return you a new HTML element. So this will return you something, and you need to append it to the page. So like remember the yesterday's workshop? Have you been here yesterday? The way they did it with the profile page, you can put comments and comments get appended. It's like very similar concept. You create a story function which create HTML, and then you append it to the page. Yeah, so like if you're like not sure what functions to call, you can look at the yesterday's workshop. Fetch means like make a get. Fetch means like collect the data. No, then like pass it into a function that is HTML element that's creating right? You take all the data, you pass it one by one, you make HTML element. And then in column 3, you're going to send it.
What is this? Sorry, that's fine. Yeah, I think this is where's
go on your website on that page.
all comments were given stories ID So basically what that means is that here you need to put like parent colon. So if we just yeah, so if we just copy this. Sorry for Yeah. So you get why those. It's like whenever you put braces, that means like that it's a JavaScript object, which means it takes like keys and values. Yeah. So in this case, the key is parent and the value is this string. So do you? So for the story DOM object, you need to I think what you need to do is you need to call these like get. So like you call it get and put in all stories. So you want to receive all stories. And then what you do is you can like iterate over all these stories and then create like the HTML. They give you an example of like creating DOM JavaScript.
Give it like maybe 2 or 3 more minutes and then I'll just go over it.
I don't think they
Which page are they actually using?
I don't think it would be
Okay,
that
and you imported API.js.
Like, did they show like document
How do they expect API? How do they expect get function?
Oh, so
Yeah.
do you have
Okay.
that slide?
Okay, so how do you get
Yeah, so I guess you'll see it in a few minutes, but basically the idea is that you would copy and paste the thing you pick up in the browser. There's something like that.
Cool. So this looks right. We're going to make a programs. We're going to need to pass in like the JavaScript element to different programs. That's what you're saying, like
Sometimes instead of like taking out all the code,
that's what you're doing.
and then for each of those stories, you would like you would build the DOM.
Success callback. So these are just functions.
Oh, DOM is something
That'll apply to
Yeah, so let's see like the hard one. So the idea is that in JavaScript, you can like go through everything that the server returns to you. So like, and then you can build like HTML. And so it's like functions.
A function that'll take in
I forget the exact thing. Things like
response, it'll iterate over all of the And then we will create a story dom object. And then I know that's all.
Yeah, so the thing is you just call this for each, like you iterate for every construct, and then you create like for each story you create like a div for that story. That makes sense. I think yeah, you kind of get the gist of it.
That's it. And then inside, so stories is going to be an array of JavaScript. I'll like walk you step by step.
Wait. Oh, see, I have no idea what this is. Like, I wasn't there for that. I was involved in the workshop.
What's the question?
Let me see. So story dot object. That's supposed to be
And then after
yeah. So yeah. Oh yeah. Story div, and then you're on you're creating like yeah, and then yeah, it looks. The one thing is that your story JSON probably doesn't have, like you probably need to access the text of the story JSON. Like, because the story JSON. Oh, you can run that in your browser. In the browser. You see exactly what it is. Like, you have this thing.
Okay, cool. So I'm just gonna walk you guys through the first step. And I'm also gonna walk through how to actually connect all this code to index.html. That was an oversight by me. Sorry, guys. Yes, what's up?
Don't even understand like what they're trying to do. At a high level, like the story code should be like we're trying to get the data, make an HTML element off of that.
Okay, I'm just gonna repeat exactly what I said. Okay, cool. So to reiterate, the goal of this first part is we're going to fetch all of the stories. We're going to create an HTML element for each of the stories. And then we're going to append or prepend each of these HTML elements to index.html. I'll just go over the first step with you guys, then we'll have lunch and then we'll continue afterwards. Okay. Cool. So the first step is to write code to fetch all stories with an API request. So let's start with feed.js. And I'm going to want to write code in the first step. Let's make these spaces. So I'm going to start by filling in render.stories, and the first thing I want to do is I'm actually going to get the HTML element that corresponds to the div in index.html that has an ID of stories, because that is where we will put all of our story divs. So to do that, I'm just going to do something like const stories div equals document dot get element ID, and then stories. Okay, so again, the first step is to write code to fetch all the stories with an API request. So I'm just going to use the get method from api.js, and I'm going to pass it, again, the first parameter is the endpoint that we want, and I've included it as a variable at the top of the file. And we're going to use the /API/stories endpoint to do this. again, this endpoint doesn't take in any additional information, so for the second parameter, I'm going to pass in an empty object. And my third parameter is going to be my success callback. So I'm going to just create an anonymous function that will take in as a parameter stories. Cool. So what do I want to do with these stories? Well, stories is an array of JavaScript objects, right? So if I want to create a story, or if I want to create an HTML element for each of my stories, I'm probably going to want to make a for loop and iterate through my stories array. So I'll call this stories array. So I'm going to make for loop. So for.
Okay.
Yes.
For now, can we just print it out and then we'll finish up the actual thing after lunch? We'll just be able to print out the stories.
Sure. So then we have to connect these two things together. Okay. So in order to actually connect feed.js to our existing HTML, we have to go into index.html, and we have to actually add script tags to include api.js. And feed.js. To our HTML. So this is an index.html at the bottom. The order of this matters. Feed.js relies on methods from api.js, so you want to load api.js first. And then index.js, you're just going to want to add a call to render stories. So that when the index.js script is loaded inside of index.html, it actually runs the code that we're writing to get all the stories. So let's see, let's put them side by side. This is index.html on the left and index.js on the right. Is everyone good with this? We're just connecting our new JavaScript files to our existing HTML. Okay, cool. So, so all we want to do right now, I guess, is we're just going to log the results of this GET request. So I'm just going to go into, oh, thanks. I'm just going to go into this, my directory, and I'm just going to open up index.html. And if I open up the console, you will see that it prints out an array of objects. Does that make sense for everyone? Okay, cool. What's up?
I'll make an announcement about food. Today we have Thai food, and it's not portioned like yesterday. So please be mindful of other people in this class. So don't eat too much food. I don't know, just be aware.
Yeah.
And yeah, the food is ready outside. So we can line up.
We got you guys pepper stuff.